Welcome to MPAConnections with me, Lashanti the Siren. This is a podcast to discuss the MPAConnect Network. This network exists to connect MPA managers across the Caribbean. In this podcast, we will be interviewing managers from across the network to show how this initiative is meeting the real needs of managers by tapping into the wealth of real-world experiences. Today on this episode, we are speaking with MPAConnect Coordinator, Emma Doyle. So now we're going to do a rapid fire session. You're going to tell us what are some of the first things that come to mind about lessons learned or best examples when you see that you see in the MPAConnect network based on the topics that I'm going to list. Are you ready?
Okay, I think I'm ready.
Awesome. So the first one will be financing and MPAs.
Okay, what comes to mind quickly? There are no simple solutions there's no silver bullet for MPA financing, and the individual MPA manager and team has to find like the right mix of strategies to generate funding for their sites and has to tackle the obstacles to getting the funding flowing, because often there's obstacles that are fundamental things that we need to solve, like legislation, which is tricky. But you have to, as a manager, you have to do the math. There's no simple way to get around this. You really have to do the maths and work out your site budget and know exactly what your forecasts are and be able to identify what the gap is that you're trying to fill in order to work out which strategies are going to best meet your needs financially. We still have a long way to go on MPA financing, unfortunately, but MPAConnect has tools, guides. I'm continuing to work with Wolf's company to put together some sort of simple materials. Job Villafranco's helped so much with MPA budgeting. We've got great examples around the network. So everybody needs to, I guess, get creative, do the math, and call on us. Make the most of the resources available and take time. I think Celia Mahung will tell us that, it really is worth taking the time to focus on getting your financing strategies right, invest time in sorting out your organizational and your MPA budgets, that it's time well invested, but it's hard to do. And, none of us are financing people, so it's not easy. So I get it. And, it takes the effort though. Okay.
Awesome. That was good. All right. The next one is going to be law enforcement, lessons learned or best example.
Okay. We've done a lot on law enforcement since 2012, when we did what I think was the region's first regional get-together on MPA enforcement, and it was great to do. But what we learned then is, you can only do law enforcement training relevant to each country or territory and the specific laws and legal structures, and depending on the local enforcement partners in those places. So we've gone back and we've done a lot of local law enforcement training as well, which has been great. The biggest thing I've learned from that is how much confusion exists among police, Coast Guard, marine agencies. There's so much confusion about who has responsibility for marine and for environmental enforcement. So the best benefit of doing joint local law enforcement training is actually getting those partners under the same roof to nut it all out. And in the Bahamas, this worked really well. Okay. And in fact, directly after the joint law enforcement training, there was a huge bust with Ports Authority involved, National Trust, with DMR got involved, backup from the military and the police. And so the biggest thing with enforcement is that you can't do it alone. And you've got to partner with your local law enforcement agencies. Also, if all you do is focus on law enforcement, you're probably setting yourself up for failure, because with MPAs, you've got to build compliance, and you've got to have all those complementary activities that help build stewardship, the livelihoods initiatives, the youth education, community liaison, in order to help support intelligence gathering and to support stewardship. It's an area that's susceptible to budget cuts and to staffing cuts. But we can be more strategic about it, and we can build strategic enforcement plans. But it depends. You need the budget, but it also then links with like biophysical monitoring and knowing where to enforce at what time of the year, so that you're not just running around in circles burning fuel. So being strategic and using some of the technology solutions that are evolving is important. I think that's it. Mr. Gamboa and Mr. Young will be able to, I'm sure, enhance this when they speak about enforcement as our mentors in Belize.
Awesome. Okay. So the next topic would be livelihoods and stakeholders, lessons learned and/or best examples.
Yeah, so Mr. Ayuso at Belize Audubon Society works hand in hand with Mr. Shane Young, who leads the marine management, marine operations, so that when they're doing their enforcement and compliance program, that community liaison is a key aspect of the work. The bar is constantly being raised for communications, and we saw this in the change between 2011 and 2017, that if anything, managers were more critical of their own performance and perhaps showed a drop in capacity in relation to communications rather than an increase over the years. Because I think the expectations of social media and online marketing and talking with stakeholders, interacting with the press, those expectations only get greater and greater.
Right.
But everything comes back to communications. Doesn't matter if I'm talking about financing or if we're working on enforcement or if we're working on monitoring, it all comes back to how do you communicate about it. So communications is just central to everything.
Right.
And it doesn't have to cost a lot. Look at if everybody gives a follow to Roatan Marine Park's Instagram, you'll see that they're doing amazing things with their social media. And that doesn't have to cost a lot. And they had some technical assistance through MPAConnect to help with that. And again, it's not a really expensive area to work on when we compare it with some of the other things that we do. So, communications is critical. And I think maybe we could make greater use of SOCMON and our socioeconomic monitoring to help guide us in our communications activities. I feel like maybe the SOCMON angle, we use it to think about livelihoods and say we've used it to help guide and to target micro grants in support of livelihoods development and livelihoods diversification, supplemental livelihoods to fisheries. We've done good work, I think, on that in Belize and Honduras, and we've targeted it according to the SOCMON data. Mexico also targeted some work according to SOCMON. But when it comes to communications, perhaps we could be doing more to measure perceptions and to try and, keep tweaking and tailoring our communications programs. Does that answer that?
Yeah, it definitely does. Which actually brings me to the next one, monitoring. And that could either be the biophysical or the socioeconomic monitoring.
Biophysical probably comes first to mind, thinking about coral monitoring and thinking about MPA monitoring. And look, by this, we're talking about having repeat structured observations, doing a baseline study once, or having some foreign researchers come in and do a study in your MPA is not really monitoring. We mean that sort of repeat monitoring. And okay, it doesn't have to be every year. In some places the Grenadines is doing monitoring. AGRA, if they can, every 3 to 5 years to get a read on what's happening with coral coverage, to get a read on what's happening with fish communities. And now, often I find MPA managers will say, well, what should we be monitoring? Well, no, hold on. I'm not going to tell you what you should be monitoring. You tell me, according to your management objectives and what you're trying to achieve and what you're, according to the questions in your head about should I do something differently when I manage, well, then we work out what you should be monitoring, what you should be tracking.
Right.
So I would encourage kind of to spin things around and don't think about this, what should I monitor, but what do I need to monitor? Because then if you have a question about should I change the way we are managing something in this area or this species, or do we have an issue with people or visitors, think about what the management question is and then design the monitoring around that. And then that repeat monitoring, track over time what's happening with it. And I mean, MPAConnect can link managers with other people who are doing monitoring and who know the reality, because that can be an expensive area of your work. Probably enforcement is the most expensive area of the work, but monitoring can also be expensive and time consuming. and to design according to what's practical. What are other managers doing in the setting where we're resource poor? How can you do cost-effective monitoring? And it is a challenge for some of our locations that are remote, and where weather is a factor. It's hard, and where there's competing priorities. I'm hearing that MPAs in the Caribbean are increasingly getting approached at the moment by foreign researchers who want to work with them. And, I'd encourage managers to be very selective about knowing what they need to get done, and therefore be selective about, where do you try and build partnerships, and be very deliberate in the scope of the work that you try and achieve. So, I mean, it's a big topic, and even when we tried to do a 1-week learning exchange on biophysical monitoring, it's more, we need more than that. But, we're doing a lot of work on stony coral tissue loss disease at the moment, and monitoring and identifying, tracking where that disease is, measuring the success of interventions. So there's great experts and willing experts, and we partner with, I have Judy Lang and Patricia Kramer basically on speed dial, who are so helpful with questions that we have about fish and coral, and others for mangroves, and others for, for all the different topics that we work with. Water quality monitoring is a big topic that we're going to be tackling coming up in the next year. And there's some great experience to share from Honduras with places like St. Vincent and the Grenadines.
Nice.
Hopefully when their volcano settles down, and when, when they're able to again focus on things like MPA management, we hope that we can share experience, because it's not just about the monitoring, it's about what you do with it, the decisions you take, and how you communicate it. Okay, but that's going long. Sorry, Lashanti. Definitely. I can talk a lot if I get the chance.
No, but like you said, that's an extensive topic. So I didn't expect that one to be the fastest.
And the other thing,
we have a few more.
The other thing that's interesting with that topic, with monitoring, there's some great examples in the region where community researchers are getting involved in monitoring. And so we've picked up a model from Tide Belize, where they developed a community researcher program to, number one, help when they needed extra people underwater. So they trained youth, trained volunteers, well, not really volunteers, but youth have received dive training and have learned to identify coral and fish, and have learned to do water quality monitoring, whatever, seagrass, whatever, mangroves too, so that you can have community researchers who will provide extra help when you need, at certain times, when you need extra people to help with doing monitoring. But they also become spokespeople who can say to their communities, I took part in this, I gathered that data, we can trust the information, and this is what we're seeing. And they can also learn and speak capably about what's going on under the water. So that model's been picked up and is being replicated in the Grenadines, for example. And so that's where we link monitoring with potentially communications, with stakeholder engagement, with youth education, and even with helping, diversify livelihoods, because, those community researchers earn a stipend, they earn something for their time spent helping. Sorry.
All these connections, I love it, even with the topics.
It is. It's all these different aspects of management are so interconnected, which is probably what makes it challenging to get right. I'm a great believer that we can do a fantastic job with MPA management. I'm a believer in the fact that we can manage MPAs effectively, and that they can contribute to sustainable development, and that they can contribute to conservation of resources. And it requires, building and taking all these great case studies, these great examples that often relate to one or other area, and linking them and bringing them together in a way that's meaningful for unique MPA contexts.
Definitely.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. Well, we do have a few more left in our rapid fire session. The next one being MPAs as a tool in fisheries management.
Oof. So, and that's, in many cases, MPAs have been specifically designed as a tool for fisheries management. And they are one of many tools for fisheries management, whether it's other tools like temporal, seasonal closures or gear restrictions or size limitations.
Yeah.
There's many different fisheries management tools, and really MPAs are just one of those. And there's different ways to do MPAs depending on your objectives for fisheries management. So look, I guess what we see in the Caribbean is that we do have many small MPAs that have been established for a variety of reasons. Sometimes they've been established without really a concern for fisheries management, but more for conflict resolution or to preserve, for a focus on tourism in an area, as a protecting a national tourism asset. So when we talk about fisheries management and MPAs, we found that managers really need to think about, well, what is the role that they seek to play in fisheries management, and what's the role that's feasible for them to play? What should their expectations be about what they can achieve, depending on the size of the protected area, depending on how long it's established for, and depending on the mix of other fisheries management tools. So it's a big area. We did a peer-to-peer learning exchange in Sabre in 2018 on this topic, and it was great to delve into that. And now some of the speakers who I hope will be featured on this podcast will speak about it from those who have years of experience and who've worked also on implementing complementary tools, like the Belizeans who've implemented managed access as a fisher licensing program, what they've learned, and what Miss Celia Mahung knows from years of working with fishers, very much on the ground. And then I'm hoping we might hear from some of the younger members of the network who are really trying to connect, working hard to connect with local fishers, like Ayumi on Sabre. So it's a big topic, and for everybody just to know that if you have a question on any aspect of fisheries, let me know, and we have great experts in all topics of herbivores and parrotfish, experts in snapper and grouper, and experts in sharks, and habitat, and all finfish and sport fish, and we can definitely connect with the latest and greatest science. And I feel privileged to be able to connect with those really good scientific experts.
Yeah, it's an extensive network, definitely. So the next one.
Oh, okay, ready.
Management planning.
Oh, I think everybody gets so overwhelmed by the thought of having to do a management plan and having to update a management plan. And it's this Bible on the shelf that's a bound book that we all have to, it's a goal. But in practice, it's interesting, when Point Saab Environmental Protection Area in St. Lucia in about 2014, 2015 wanted to update their management plan. They had an old plan, and I think it was Lloyd Gardner, who's very well respected, had worked on that. And now, a number of years later, the National Trust had resources to be able to operationalise the park and to protected area, to develop and to and to think also about additional aspects of the plan, like communications and financing and everything. So poor old Mr. Tulsi, who's the executive director at the Trust, I think when we first started to talk about this, he was just like, oh, what a process. How are we going to do this? But we designed a really clear way to talk with the co-managers of the protected area, to update about the status of resources with the users through some consultation meetings. And we really honed in. We had a couple of experts in management, people with great experience in working with and writing management plans. A couple of people gave us input on sections of the plan that now we probably needed to update. And so we didn't try to rewrite the whole thing. We just tried to focus on the things that needed updating in order for the Trust to be able to manage the site with its partners, and held a number of meetings. We had great attendance. The Trust did a great job in helping me to organise, and we facilitated those together. We updated the sections that needed it, and done. And at a certain point in that process, Mr. Tulsi said to me, I can see there's light at the end of the tunnel. And I was so pleased. Now, one of the things also that we did with the management plan there, and in helping others in the Grenadine, in St. Vincent and Grenada, was also to think about the management plan not as a big bound permanent document, but to put it in a binder. And one of those ring binders that you can open up.
Yep.
If a section's no good, throw it away.
Mm-hmm.
You get new information, put it in place. You have some pullouts so that when you go to a board meeting or a stakeholder meeting, you can go, right, let's pull out what we're trying to do in a easy to read format, or summaries of monitoring findings, to try and break it down and make it manageable and make it a living document.
Yeah. Because
managers, the management plan is important to drive you to know what should be in your MPA budget.
Mm-hmm.
Fundamental. It can help drive, your partnerships with enforcement partners or research partners. It's a fundamental and it's important document to know, to have good, clear guidance. But it's got to be workable for the manager. So in that sense, and in helping bring the connections, it needs to be something that you can refer to, that you can update, that you can change. And so, and we've seen that in 2011, and then in 2017, when we asked managers in this capacity assessment process, how are you doing on management planning? We didn't see any progress. I mean, we've worked on this with a couple of sites that progressed, but then overall, the plans get outdated, or they're still not formally approved. If they need to go through parliamentary approval or anything really serious, they're still not approved. So we weren't seeing change in that area. And maybe that reflects some of the challenges we have in other areas of management. So it's important to get right.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. And I like that you said it's typically seen as this Bible on the shelf that you can't change, but now you guys are doing it in these binders. So you can pull out sections that are no longer relevant and update them. So that's a better way, I think, of doing management planning, as opposed to the archaic, this is in stone for as long as it can be.
Yeah.
Awesome. So our next rapid fire section is communications. Oh, this one's my favorite.
I think I've already talked about this like 3 times. Yeah, no, just fundamental.
Give you a best example?
Yeah, a best example. I think I have to say that in terms of our mentor for education work, it's always a pleasure to work with teachers, and it's always a pleasure to work with youth, the next generation. And it's it's something that MPAs can do where, we don't always have, we don't have, say, a lot of conflict involved. We're giving something back to communities by helping to involve kids in the chance to get to know what's in their world, to get to know their local protected area, to get to know what's under the water, maybe to learn to swim, snorkel, dive, to learn about engines and driving boats. Practical MPA education is great to do. Bonaire Junior Rangers, who are an initiative of Stinapa, the foundation that manages Bonaire's parks. They've had such a great program over the years. Desiree Croes has always been willing to share with us and to learn too from others in the network, and to get the kids to share around the network as well. She's contributed a lot. We've worked a lot over the years together through the Dutch Caribbean Nature Alliance, and getting Desiree and the Junior Rangers to help our network has been great. So we got them to the peer-to-peer, where we talked about strategic communications and also about education, and shared all about, how to, what we've learned from communicating with fishers. But we learned a bit, but then there were a couple of sites that especially wanted to develop Junior Ranger type programs.
Yeah.
And Amy Avenant and the Turks and Caicos, Varsha Clark in Belize Audubon Society, working with the Blue Hole, and Vicky at Ixcalac in Mexico, Sabre as well, Leslie and Sabre. They all got together for kind of a write shop in Bonaire, where they got to go out and see what Desiree does with the Junior Rangers and how the program works, where volunteers fit in, what the kids do, how it's designed, how they work with partners. And when they were doing that process, we actually got, say, Amy and Varsha wanted to put down on paper so they could explain to corporate donors, to social NGOs what they were doing, and put together an outline of the protected area education plan. Was made it so much easier for them to go away and really design these programs. And so the Blue Hole and Half Moon Key Natural Monument, there's now a Reef Protectors program, which is a youth education program. And kids are doing really, really well. And there's so much interest in that program. And now when the enforcement team are doing their visits to boats that are fishing in the MPAs, and when they're checking licenses, sometimes they have the community liaison officer with them, and they're able to actually say, your son was with us the other day. He's doing really well, and he's about to get his diver's license. He's doing such a great job with learning, and he's now been speaking in debates or talking in the communities at meetings about what the reef protectors are doing, and sort of close that circle, which has been really valuable, so that it's not just hard enforcement that's going on out in the park, although there is a role for that, of course, but it's also linking with the community benefits and the benefits of outreach and education that come back in, that are helping reinforce the enforcement program. The compliance program is stronger, and it really is building a sense of stewardship. So others are adopting this. Orisha Joseph and the MPAs and the Grenadines have done great work on it. And so, that education angle is always a pleasure to work on.
Definitely.
Which makes me think, which makes me remember too, we also have World Heritage sites in our network, and they're special places that also have unique perspective on things. And and between the Belize Barrier Reef and St. Lucia's Pitons Management Area, those are World Heritage areas with special programs too. Sorry, awesome. I digress.
No, it's not a problem. Our next topic is responding to disturbances, like the sargassum and the coral disease, hurricanes, etc. Yeah.
And that's the topic that comes at the bottom. When we look at when we look at what managers are telling us about where do they most prioritize their requests for capacity building, it's on the bottom. Nobody nominated it as a priority area when we pushed them to pick the top 3. And it's an area where there's quite uneven capacity. We present the capacity findings in maps that show, where is there high or low capacity around the region, which helps us see, where to target assistance. And it's pretty uneven. It's something, responding to disturbances is something that requires action planning, really requires good multi-agency, multi-partner planning, which is hard to do. And it really only becomes a priority when the disaster happens. When there's a hurricane, when the volcano blows up, when there's suddenly bleaching, when there's suddenly an oil spill or a grounding, that's when it's a problem. So, and I kind of have to apologize to everybody this year and the last 2 years. We're trying to work on important stuff for the MPAs and get projects done, but then we've had the coral disease appear. And so suddenly all these plans to do great stuff on MPA management, my time and managers' time and a lot of effort in NOAA is going into that crisis of coral disease. So
it shoots straight up the priority list.
Exactly. And so that's when exactly. And so when those things happen, you realize you need local action plans to help us prioritize and allocate resources and bring people together and managers can't deal with these things on their own. If it's cleaning up sargassum or it's treating corals or monitoring corals, well, then you need to know who's going to go where and when and where do we put our effort. So that's all I can say is we do have some really great resources though on action planning for coral disease. So please, use those to as a starting point to try and make life easier for managers to tailor things to what they need as an action plan at site level. Or we also share other examples from Florida, from Mexico, wherever to help managers see what they could do in terms of local action planning. So come to us for help and resources on those things, GCFI and MPAConnect both.
Yeah, definitely.
Oof.
So last but not least,
another one.
I know you made it through. Climate change, which of course has been a reoccurring theme for decades now.
Yeah, and it's really, it's such an external driver of many of the of issues that we face day to day and that our managers on the ground are having to deal with, and yet it's one of these things that's really hard to to do anything to mitigate. We've done quite a bit of work on climate change adaptation for MPA managers, and there's a program called LEAP, Local Early Action Planning for Adaptation to Climate Change, which Megan Gombos, who originally helped with the original capacity assessment, she has helped us to tailor this kind of approach to consultation with stakeholders from the Pacific region to the Caribbean, and we tested it out in Mexico. No, sorry, we tested it out in the north and in the south of Belize with different fishing communities, and then we've also applied it in Carriacou in Grenada, and it's been a really good way to help managers think about adaptation and kind of have a structure, to have an approach and a way to go to communities to start to talk about climate change adaptation. Now, there's, I guess, two things. Let me think about bleaching, coral bleaching, and let me think about compliance in the context of and planning and compliance, because there's really good science that surrounds some of the issues that we see. Originally, we worked with the 5 Cs, the CARICOM Climate Change Centre in Belmopan, to try and pin down what are the climate change projections for the Caribbean, and what does that translate to as the effects or the impacts that managers might be dealing with. So we tried to be very specific, and we've got a cheat sheet that has, the types of, if we see a sea level rise of this, what can we expect to see in terms of impacts on fishes and on particular fisheries even? What's the impact on the lobster fishery in the south of Mexico? We can talk about really concrete impacts. So that was very important to pin it down. Like ocean acidification is a big one, and that's very hard for an MPA manager to be able to talk about constructively. And, some experts have even advised me, just don't manage. For managers, it's a hard one to even try and tackle. But if we can focus on things like impacts on fisheries and impacts on corals, then, we have great science from the NOAA Coral Reef Watch program that forecasts what's likely to happen with bleaching. And if MPA managers can monitor the Coral Reef Watch and talk when they, we've got some great advice on trigger points. When should you start to talk to managers? When the warning gets to coral bleaching is likely, well, let's start to talk to stakeholders about this and tell them about the predictions and tell them to look out for bleaching and let us know if they're seeing it. Then it happens. Gee, that's going to be good for our credibility as managers to be able to forecast what's going under the water, going on under the water, and for our stakeholders to see that we're credible and have real good information. Well, then being able to respond as things happen, that's been the focus of the local early action planning work. And so, there's really nice guides and good examples on that. So we can always link anyone who's interested on that topic. But yeah, building coral reef resilience, I think, is what we're all about, and helping communities to adapt as part of our, part of what we do. It's probably going to be an increasing thing. We're seeing perhaps with sargassum and, if ocean currents change and fisheries change, it'll perhaps be something that we go to more and more. But as part of responding to disturbances, it's all up there as to thinking about action planning and sort of making it a priority for those sites where it's relevant. And it's not, when people can work on it, but certainly financing and enforcement and, getting monitoring data and dealing with fisheries management for our MPAs, those are featuring higher. But we have got good resources and good partners when it comes to climate change and thinking resilience. Oof.
That's good to know.
Are we doing all 20?
I said, it definitely, climate change is one of those. No, that is the last one.
And
so
and
Lishanti, easier.
Lishanti, it also shows how important are partnerships. And marine protected areas often can be kind of ambassadors for work on difficult issues like marine debris or like climate change. Where the managers can be in touch with their focal points for international initiatives, that's important. part of the manager's time, is inevitably involved in some of these bigger picture issues, but also working effectively with managers, with other agencies, and with other focal points who take a role nationally and regionally, and those is important.
Yeah, definitely. So, to sum up, are you feeling very optimistic about the prospects for MPAs in the Caribbean?
I think I probably, because I've worked in this area for 10 years and in conservation and sustainable development before that, I think I'm probably naturally an optimist, and I think you have to be an optimist. I am a firm believer that there are really good experiences and examples, and there are really good people making progress on the ground. So it's a hard job, and it's always under-resourced, but I'm a firm believer that there's good work going on, and I'm fortunate that I'm focused on sharing things that work and things that don't work. And I think that by coming together and by sharing those experiences, we can be optimistic about the future for MPAs, and we can be optimistic and we can be positive about the role that MPAs have to play nationally. And I think COVID, if anything, has shown that rangers are in the field, they can be relied upon to be out there, to be trying to protect resources, that MPA managers, even if they're facing austerity measures, they're doing everything they can to ensure that resources are managed well for future generations, and that we don't lose hard-fought gains that we've made in the past in establishing these areas and in managing them well. So I think there's a wealth of reasons to be positive about the prospect for MPAs in the Caribbean. And I think I can see that by, even though MPAConnect through GCFI and NOAA and other partners, even though we may have only had a relatively small amount of support and funding to contribute, by virtue of working on an enduring basis, by working over a number of years and being consistent and being targeted in the support, I think we can bring change, and we can help managers to achieve what they want to and need to achieve. So if we're working hard behind the scenes to try and bring more support for capacity building and for networking in the Caribbean, and if we can achieve that, I think the perspectives should only be positive.
For sure. I'm definitely optimistic. I think MPAs in the Caribbean are not only beautiful, but definitely essential. So,
yep. That's a good tagline. They are essential.
Yeah. I do like that. Thank you so much for being on this episode, Emma. It was so great to have you do this initial episode. Of course, MPAConnect is this network, and MPAConnections is now this podcast. So you being the coordinator for the network was the perfect person to have on this first episode. And to all the viewers, thank you for tuning in to this episode of MPAConnections. Again, a huge thank you to our guest, Emma Doyle. Make sure you follow the work of MPAConnect on their Facebook page and on their Instagram page. This is where you can find out about more episodes about this podcast. And again, follow all the work that's been happening in the past and the work that's to come for the future. So see you next time on MPAConnections.
Thanks, Lashanti.